welcome to another video. Today it is the sew along for the Butterick 6130 jumpsuit. So my Patreon peeps voted for this jumpsuit in the jumpsuit edition, and I think that was probably November, maybe October, but it was last year. And as we all know, I'm running very behind with my sew alongs, but I have got there eventually, and I'm very glad that I did. I really love this jumpsuit. I think it's awesome, and I actually very much like the trousers as well, and I'm quite tempted to put a waistband on and just use those as trousers because they fit really nicely. This is a pattern that comes with 3 dress types and then a jumpsuit option, and the vote I put up was for the jumpsuits, and this was the one that I made. I'm really pleased with it. I did my usual alterations to this jumpsuit, which was to add length to the torso, and the pattern would have you add it all into the waistband area, which is fine and I think has worked okay. But I think when I make this next time, I'm going to take the length out of the waistband, take that back down to here, and then put the length into the bodice, because the bodice is sitting just, my underbust is about an inch lower than this. So I think if I had switched this around and put the extra length into this part and just kept this as was, it might look proportionally slightly better. But I can't say that I am unhappy with this jumpsuit, and I will totally be wearing this. I use a satin back crepe from the fabric room in the bottle green, and then this is a remnant of some Lady McElroy Savannah crepe that I made a skirt and top out of, not this January, the January before. I still have some fairly large scraps of this fabric to make something else with, and as you all know, this is one of my absolutely favourite prints, so you're probably going to be seeing this quite a lot. I really like this use of, as I say, decent sized remnants, and I think it's really effective. I really like the collar on this as well. You can't really see because my hair is in the way. It's a very wide collar. I am wearing a black bra, and you could totally wear a strapless bra with this, but I personally find that they don't fit me very well, so I have gone for a bra that kind of matches, and with all the hair no one's ever going to see. Right, so that's enough waffle. We shall get into the actual sew along. So this is part 1, and today we're going to be finding out the size we need to trace, tracing the pattern, making the alterations, and getting the fabric cut out. So let's get started. You're going to need pattern, fabric, matching thread, scissors, even more scissors, French curve, your marking tool of choice, pins, seam ripper, ask me how I know, sewing machine, iron, ironing board, bias binding. You're also going to need tracing paper and a pencil. The first thing that you want to do is iron your pattern pieces, because that will make tracing out very much easier. And I do like to trace my patterns because in the UK they are expensive even when they're in the sale, and I may wish to make another size of this in the future. I use tracing paper that I get from Moreplan. I buy a giant roll of 300 meters, and it's around about £75. I find that that works really well and will last me, the last one lasted me for about 4 years. With tracing out, what I do is I put a giant sheet of the tracing paper down, because the surface I'm working on is black, and as you can see that's very difficult to see through, especially when then you try and trace through that. It's nearly impossible to see. So I put a giant piece of the white tracing paper down, then I put the tissue, then I put the tracing paper over the top, and it usually works pretty well. The next thing that I like to do is get out the list of pattern pieces, and I make myself a list of the bits that I want. So I'm making the jumpsuit, so I need all of the bodice pieces up to the collar, and then I need the pants front and the pants back. So I've written myself a list here, and I can cross those off, tick them off as I trace out those pattern pieces. The next thing I need to do is find out the size that I want to trace. Going by the pattern envelope here, I would need to do a size 16 bust, a size 12 waist, and a size 18 hip. Now I only have the set that goes up to the size 14, and I think I am going to actually need to add a little bit to the hips, because the finished measurement for the size 14 is 42 inches, so I will need to add some ease to that. But for the bust, according to the pattern envelope, I'm supposed to be a size 16, and the finished measurement that I want would be a size for the size 12. Here the 12 is, it's a 34-inch bust, which will give you a 39.5-inch finished measurement. So that's a 5.5-inch wearing ease added to this. Now this is a slightly blouson effect across the bust, but 5.5 inches of wearing ease is an awful lot. I think I'm going to be happier around either size 12 or maybe possibly the size 14. For the finished measurements on the waist, I'm going to need the size 8 or 10 between the two. I might err on the side of caution and go for the size 10, I think. So I kind of don't want to be having to go from a 14 here down to the 10 there, although that is doable. Yeah, I think I'm going to err a little bit on the side of blues on and go for the 14 bust and then the size 10 at the waist. So I'm going to make a note of that here, and it will have to be the 14 hips, but I'm going to need to add ease to those because the finished pattern measurements, the size 14 will give me 42-inch finished measurement, and that's my actual hip measurement, so I want more ease than that. So I'm going to add a couple of inches to the side seams here. So once I've worked out everything that I need to trace out, I'm going to get that started, and as I say, once I've traced a piece off, I will then tick it off this list so that I make sure that I get everything. And ask me how I know. I have managed to miss pieces in the past. Okay, so I mentioned that I need to add some room to the trousers because as they are, the finished trouser leg measurement is my actual hip measurement. So what I've done is I've just added an inch from the lengthen and shorten line because it's the same on the front and the back. So I've added an inch out from that and done the same. This is the size 14 here, and then this is an inch away from that, so I've done that the whole way down. I'm going to round this out a little more so it isn't like a jagged curve there, but it's going up to size 10 at the waist. I will need to lengthen the crotch on these, but I'm going to show you guys how I do that. Okay, so now that I have cut out all of the traced pattern pieces, I now need to make my standard alterations to them. For me, that is, I need to add an inch of length to the torso because I have a long torso, and the lengthen and shorten lines are on pattern pieces 4 and 3, the midriff pieces. And the important thing to note here is that we have a perpendicular line going straight through the lengthen and shorten pieces. Technically there is one here on the front piece, but I'm going to add another one over here, and it just has to be at a right angle to your lengthen and shorten line, and that is your reference point for matching up the pieces when you're sticking them to your piece of paper. So as I say, I need to add an inch of length to the torso. I will then need to adjust the crotch depth on this, but I'm going to show you that in a second. So the first thing you want to do is draw yourself a rectangle of however much length you need to add. As I say, for me, it's always been an inch. And then I'm going to draw a perpendicular line through that as my reference point. Then I'm going to take my pattern piece, cut along the lengthen and shorten line. So I'm going to take the bottom of that and use that reference line that I drew, the perpendicular one. So I'm going to line up the new cut edge with the bottom of my 1 inch wide rectangle and line up the perpendicular line with the reference line that I drew on the pattern piece and tape that down the whole way along. Once that's all taped down, you then take the top part of that pattern piece and line up the cut edge there with the top of your 1 inch rectangle. And again, you want to match up the reference line that I drew in and tape that down. Oops. And you want to make sure that you don't do that. You want it to be nice and flat. So now we need to smooth out the edges. So this one's easy because that's a straight line that's cut on the fold. This one is a little bit more difficult. So what I'm going to do is, it's actually a straight line. I'm going to draw from the bottom corner of the pattern piece to the top corner of the pattern piece in a straight line, and I'm going to actually need to add a little bit more paper back there. So I now have a new cutting line there. Just add in the notches. I need to put some tape down there and then cut the new pattern piece out. So I'll cut off a little bit too much there. I'm going to take that away. Get the tape out, tape down that edge. There we have the new front midriff piece with an extra inch of length added. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing to the back midriff, and then I can work on the crotch depth of the trousers. Okay, so to lengthen the crotch depth, you're going to need to do a few things. The first thing that I have done is drawn in the seam allowance along the waistline, the crotch and the inseam on both the back and front pieces of the trouser pattern. And then I have measured with my flexible tape measure, with the flexible tape measure on its side, the actual length, not including the seam allowance. So I'm starting 5/8 of an inch down, and I'm walking the tape measure all the way around the curve carefully. And the back is 14 3/4 and the front is 13 1/4. And I'm using my fraction calculator on my phone. It's called Fraction Plus. I've tried to link this in the description bar of my videos before and always failed, but it's from the App Store. It's called Fraction Plus. It's amazing. 14 3/4 plus 13 1/4 equals 28 inches. So that is the exact measurement of the crotch depth on these trousers at the moment. Now you want to measure your own crotch depth, which for me is from my waistline, which is just below my belly button, all the way around to the same point on the back. And for me, my crotch depth is actually 29 inches. So already these are an inch too small for me, or too shallow for me, and would be very uncomfortable to wear. I want to add in actually 2.5 inches of wearing ease. That may seem like quite a lot, but I just want to err on the side of caution, because obviously this is a jumpsuit, so it's not like it's going to sit at my waist. It's going to have tension from the shoulders as well. So I want to make sure that I'm really comfortable in this, both standing and sitting. So I want my crotch depth to be 31.5 inches. So 31.5 inches minus 28 equals, so I need to add 3.5 inches of length. I want to add that equally between the front and the back. The pattern company have already done all the balance work for you, so the back is longer than the front, as we have seen from measuring it. So I don't want to worry about adding more to the back than I do to the front, because the pattern company have done that for me. So 3.5 inches divided by 2 equals 1 3/4 inches. So that's the amount of extra depth that I need to add to the lengthen and shorten lines for the front and back trouser pieces, which sounds about right. It's usually around about that much. The pattern has the lengthen and shorten lines, which I traced off from their pattern, and they run just above the crotch curve. So this is the perfect place to add in length there. I have my grain line running perpendicular through those lengthen and shorten lines, which means this will be very easy to then line up on the scrap piece of paper where I'm adding the extra length in. So for some reason I didn't draw anything on the back piece, so I'm going to need to write all the details on that and then also draw in the grain line, and that will be my registration point for everything shorten the line as well. So I'm gonna do all that and show you how I do it as I go. The first thing you want to do is make sure that the piece of paper that you're going to add the length with actually fits over your pattern piece, which mine does. So now I need to draw 2 lines 1 3/4 inches apart. So that's 1 inch and that's 3/4 of an inch. This time I'm not going to draw the registration mark on immediately, because I haven't got a load of paper to be working with. So I'm going to chop through the lengthen and shorten line. I'm going to stick that down. So that new cut line I'm going to stick down to the bottom of that box that I just drew, or rectangle that I just drew. Make sure everything stays nice and flat. Okay, so now that I have that piece down, I'm going to use the perpendicular line from the pattern just to draw it through the bottom part of that rectangle. Try not to lose your pattern pieces. So I can take the bottom part of the trouser pattern piece, line up that registration line that we've just drawn, which is the grain line, and stick that down. And again, make sure everything stays nice and flat. And then we need to smooth out the lines to get our pattern pieces so that there's no big jogs. For this one, the curve was starting right at the bottom of where the lengthen and shorten line was to then go around, and the curve is still there intact. So I actually want this to be straight up to the original pattern line there. So I've just moved the seam allowance over a little bit, but that'll be okay. And then on this side, again, kind of want to just join up those 2 lines. I'm going to cut that out, and then that's 1 3/4 inches of length added to the back of the trousers. I'm going to do exactly the same process to the front. If you have any questions at all, please let me know in the comment section down below and I will do my best to answer them for you. I hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!